Dan Woike, he covers the Lakers for the LA Times and kind enough to join us this morning here. All right. How's morale in Lakerland?
I think people are excited to reach the finish line on this, Dan. You know, it is one of these types of things. Like once you get to the destination, people are excited. There's a general sense of excitement once you get your guy, even if the path may have taken you in different directions right away. I think that they are at least presenting, a fully excited, um, how to optimistic sort of view. They know there's risk. They know there's tremendous risk in this, but I think that they feel like they've hired a forward-thinking um, coaching prospect, and they think it'll pay off in the short term, and they think it'll pay off in the long term.
But when you look at this, it almost feels like it'll be two different coaching careers. You're going to have the
Yep.
LeBron coaching career and then post LeBron coaching career. How does he navigate
Yeah.
that?
Well, that always works, right, Dan? When you have to do two things at once, and I think it is. I have not heard anybody use the phrase two timelines, right? Which was sort of made famous by the Golden State Warriors. And yes, they won a championship, but two timelines was a real issue for Steve Kerr and Bob Myers in that office, where at one time you're trying to maximize the time you have with your veteran while also developing, the Jonathan Wisemans, the Kamingas, I'm sorry, the James Wisemans, the Jonathan Kamingas, the Moses Moody's of the world, et cetera. The Lakers don't have like that level of young player on their roster, but they are trying to maximize the LeBron years, right? Provided he resigns, which I think is the expectation, mostly around the league, is that he will. But they're trying to maximize whether that's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. But they also need, while that's happening, to be building for tomorrow. And so that means, Austin Reeves taking another step forwards. That means, really tapping into the physical potential of Rui Hachimura, looking at young players like Max Christie, last year's first round draft pick, Jalen Hood Shapiro. They picked 17 in this draft, the player that they could take there. And really not just say, like, we're going to develop these guys. I think, what I'm hearing is that there's going to be an increased sort of infrastructure investment in development, right? Better tech, better better strategies on that front end. And I think the thought is that JJ Redick is going to be more open minded to that stuff. He doesn't really have any of the scars of coaching in the NBA, right? So you could put whatever in front of him, he should give it a good look. And then I think the other part of it is roster building, Dan. You have to create pathways for these young players that you draft to play. And that's where it gets really tricky, because you are trying, when you have LeBron James, and the way that they've gone about roster building in free agency is like they just grab best available veterans you can get on minimum deals. We would do the show probably on July 10th. We talk about what a great job Rob Pelinka did because he got Carmelo Anthony on a minimum. He got those kinds of guys on minimum deals. Torian Prince last year on the cheap, stuff like that. Well, as they move forwards into this new sort of CBA landscape, where drafting and developing is gonna matter so much. Not only do you have to draft and develop the good players, then you have to give them runways to play and runways to actually learn and do it on the court. And that's where it gets tricky, because your clock is also ticking with LeBron James. The Western Conference, the margins are so slim. So it's a small needle that's going to need to be threaded by JJ Redick.
But also his assistants, you're hiring a CEO and you have that infrastructure and these, if you're going to bring in Scotty Brooks, who's been a head coach, Sam Cassell with the Celtics, Jared Dudley with the Mavs. I mean, you're going to, Rajon Rondo. So you're getting some younger, I guess, voices in there to be able to mesh with these players and help develop them. Do we know what's official as far as assistant coaches?
Yeah, nothing is official at this point. I think, that list is a list I reported a few weeks ago. It's been re-reported here. I think is like was like a target pool. Jared Dudley, I think, is going to stay in Dallas. We'll see what happens in terms of the type of job he gets. Sam Cassell, I think, is going to stay in Boston. That Charles Lee moving to Charlotte, there's an opportunity there for him to slide up the bench into the number 2 spot. I mean, those two, those are the two finals teams, right? Like, those are pretty good situations.
Yeah.
Scott Brooks is a name that I've heard a lot. I think the most interesting thing I've learned, Dan, is that the plan is to not have just one former head coach on the front row, it's to have at least two, which would sort of mirror what the Lakers did in 2019 with Frank Vogel when they put him around Jason. Well, they didn't put him around. They added Jason Kidd and Lionel Hollins to that staff, and they really had sort of balance in terms of voice. And I think, for a first-time head coach, that's so critical to have to sort of know what you don't know, right? And I don't doubt that that'll occur with JJ. To know what you don't know, and then to also be able to say, like, to delegate responsibilities and to build a staff that's both balanced, experienced, but also willing to work with a guy who's going to be learning on the job.
Dan Woike covers the Lakers. He's the beat reporter for the LA Times. What about the LeBron JJ podcast?
Great question. I can't imagine it's going to continue. Sad, right? Like, we might get a season finale episode, maybe the helicopter, like Masters. Like who knows what's going to happen here? I think though, this is knowing JJ a little bit, and he is interested in a lot of things, right? Like, this is a guy who is interested in broadcasting. He's interested in wine. He's interested in golf. He's interested in very fancy suits. He's going to have to adjust. He's going to have to learn how to be interested in quarter zips, like all the rest of these guys in the NBA on the sidelines now. He's going to have to learn how to focus in that energy. And I think that's what the Lakers think they're getting, right? They're not hiring a podcaster. I think they view it as that they are hiring somebody who is a bright basketball mind, who is serious about this. I think that's one of the things and sort of the discussion throughout this process, right? Is I reported this today. LeBron and JJ obviously have a good relationship. You can see it on camera. It's hard to fake that type of stuff, right? They've got good rapport. Their rapport before the podcast, Dan, didn't really exist. Like, this is still a relatively new relationship. Like, I've even been told this much that, like, they didn't really hang out ever before this. I mean, they were competitors in the NBA. Kind of an anomaly, even though they're around the same age. Like, LeBron had been in the league for 4 years the first time a rookie JJ Redick played against LeBron James. But I think, interestingly enough, two coaches in a row now that LeBron James has played with or against that will be coaching him in the NBA. But I think their relationship, to me, it's critical to what's going on. But like you said, there's an expiration date to it, and whether or not I just don't think they can really continue the show. I guess that's my long-winded way of saying it. Just seems like an unnecessary distraction. They're paying him to coach. They're not paying him to podcast. His divestment from his podcast empire is sort of an interesting media side note to this, to see kind of how much he steps back and kind of what happens to it, because it's been really successful for him.
If he doesn't have the podcast with LeBron, finish that sentence.
If he doesn't have the podcast with LeBron James, the Lakers have more questions, I think, about his ability to coach LeBron.
Would he still be the guy that they would hire?
I think it's possible. Mike Krzyzewski is a key figure, Dan, in all of this. Someone that Rob Pelinka has a lot of respect for. Someone who Rob Pelinka has known for a very long time. His wife attended Duke University. But Rob, through Kobe Bryant in Team USA basketball. And look, I think there's a very real way that even without the podcast, Mike Krzyzewski, would have said, who's thinking about coaching and who would be really good as JJ Redick. And I think the questions, though, Dan, would be like, well, how LeBron has pulled himself back from this process. He doesn't want to be as involved in it. How do we gauge whether or not LeBron would even be open to this? I think what the podcast can show you, and if you watch certain clips, there was a clip that I tweeted the other day that really stuck out to me, was they were talking about analytics and three-point shooting, right? And LeBron James at a certain point, as most players will, push back on analytics and said, like, well, what happens when, a team misses 28 straight, like the Houston Rockets did in the finals or in the Western Conference Finals? And JJ Redick, like razor quick, was like, has it happened since? And LeBron kind of chuckled, sipped his, nice Bordeaux or whatever he was drinking, was like, all right, you're right. And it was an example of, like, watching JJ, like, disarm and, win an argument really quickly on the spot. Now, how that plays in the locker room at halftime when you're down 17 to the Charlotte Hornets and everybody's tired, who knows? Like, that is a huge question. But I think, to be quite fair, like there was going to be elements of question with that with Dan Hurley too. I think they wanted Dan Hurley first because Dan Hurley had the experience. He's been in that position. But I think if we look at things like track records and stuff like this, I mean, the transition for college coaches jumping into the NBA is really rough. The transition for guys doing it from behind the microphone to the NBA can be really rough. It's all projection.
Can the Lakers at the introductory press conference say, this is the guy we wanted all along? Ladies and gentlemen, J.J. Redick.
I think it'll be more so some version of, we were blessed to have found multiple candidates that we thought were incredible. I think would be, I'm stealing from my own wedding vows here. I'm trying to remember what I said to Milo. I said, honey, you were the right person at the right time. And then after the 3-hour break, we were able to calm her down. We were able to finish it off. But no, I think there'll be some version of that, right? It's a fair question, though.
So Bronny is going to be a Laker? More likely now with JJ there? Foregone conclusion?
It's interesting. I don't know if it makes it more or less likely. I think that, 55 does feel like his floor, right? That provided, that's where the Lakers pick in the second round currently. They could move up. But provided that nothing, they don't have to go up and get him. I think it's possible. But look, I think that there's also, Dan, right? Like, we know there's going to be a lot of questions about sort of JJ and LeBron's relationship and stuff like that. And if the Lakers care about things like optics and they feel like optics would get in the way of a player's development, which potentially it could, maybe in that way it makes it less likely. I can tell you that they have tried their best. The people that I talk to in like their scouting departments, right? And now, granted, they're not the ones ultimately making the decision, but the people who are actually scouting the players have tried their best to remove LeBron from the equation when it comes to Bronny James. And there are things that they like about the player that would make them comfortable drafting him at 55 in a way that, quite frankly, like a lot of different people, if you look at the track record of players drafted at 55, the hit rates are really low, different things like this. But the Lakers are seemingly comfortable not only drafting Bronny James, but if they take him at 55, not signing him to a two-way deal, which Rich Paul has been very open and adamant that he won't take. So the Lakers seem comfortable with that part of it. But they also know that it would have to be a big, long developmental process. So maybe that's where, JJ's ability and they think he'll be a good developmental coach. In that way, maybe it does make more likely. Dan, I have no idea on this one. There's been a ton of smoke. It is unprecedented territory where a top 60 player is sort of the story of the draft.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Thank you, bud. Great to talk to you again. That's Dan
Thanks for having
Woike,
me.
the LA Times.